What if some corporate shill wanted to sabotage the merits of a meat-based diet? How might one go about doing that? Well, there are numerous ways to pull that off, but one way would be to engineer a vitamin B12 deficiency in hundreds, potentially thousands of meat eaters. First, you would need to establish yourself as an authority figure in the field of human nutrition, where people follow you and look up to you. Then, once you've reached some critical mass and notoriety, start recommending a diet that's scientifically designed to engineer a mass B12 deficiency. But how would a massive epidemic in B12 deficiency among meat eaters sabotage the merits of a meat-based diet? Well, in order to understand that, you need to know some things about vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is a nutrient that helps keep the body's nerve and blood cells healthy. Vitamin B12 helps make DNA, the genetic material in all cells. You need B12 to make red blood cells, which carry oxygen through your body. Not having enough B12 can lead to anemia, which means your body does not have enough red blood cells to carry sufficient oxygen throughout your body. This can make you feel weak and tired. Vitamin B12 is required for the DNA synthesis of the cells that make myelin. The myelin sheath surrounds the axons of many nerves and serves as an electrical insulation which allows fast conduction velocity. Vitamin B12's role in myelin formation means that it significantly supports the regeneration of nerves after an injury. In addition to this major role, B12 is involved in homocysteine metabolism, nerve metabolism, fatty acid and nucleic acid synthesis, energy production, as well as cell maturation processes, and even supports the maintenance of an intact gastrointestinal mucosa. So here are some symptoms of a B12 deficiency: extreme tiredness, lack of energy, breathlessness, feeling faint, headaches, noticeable heartbeats, hearing sounds coming from inside the body rather than from an outside source, loss of appetite and weight loss, a pale or yellow tinge to your skin, a sore and red tongue, mouth ulcers, the sensation of pins and needles, changes in the way that you walk and move around, disturbed vision, irritability, depression, changes in the way you think, feel, and behave, a decline in your mental abilities such as memory, understanding, and judgment. Suffice to say, sufficient vitamin B12 levels are paramount to human health, and if thousands or millions of meat eaters suddenly found themselves B12 deficient, this could be a public relations disaster for a carnivore or meat-based diet, giving false credence to the misanthropic diet known as veganism. So what would be a potential recipe for engineering a mass B12 deficiency in meat eaters? The first thing a corporate shill with this misanthropic goal in mind could do would be to trivialize the eating of organ meats and encourage his or her followers to settle for a diet consisting simply of muscle meats. This is because compared to liver, for example, muscle meats are relatively low in vitamin B12. So, just by encouraging a muscle meat-only diet, the shill's followers are already marching towards a vitamin B12 deficiency by keeping their B12 consumption relatively low. The next thing a corporate shill might do is recommend his or her followers consume something that would effectively block the small amount of B12 that they are acquiring in their muscle meat-only diet. Now, what could be ingested along with muscle meat that has the potential to block vitamin B12? Spirulina supplements. Some call it blue-green algae, others call it bacteria or cyanobacteria. The truth is, spirulina is neither a true bacteria or a true algae. It's something unique to both, something that has some of the characteristics of bacteria, such as manufacturing protein from atmospheric nitrogen, and some of the characteristics of algae, such as the ability to produce energy via photosynthesis. Probably the best description of spirulina is that it's an algae that incorporates symbiotic bacteria into its tissues. So what's important to know about spirulina in this context is that it produces what are called vitamin B12 analogs in very high quantities. B12 analogs are also called pseudovitamin B12 because they are molecules that are similar to bioactive B12 but provide absolutely none of the function of bioactive B12. Therefore, these spirulina B12 analogs are prone to take a seat in our body's B12 receptor sites, effectively blocking actual functional bioactive dietary B12. This creates a situation where, even though a muscle meat only diet might be able to provide just enough B12 to prevent a full-on deficiency, that little bit of B12 is no longer able to function because B12 analogs are occupying all of our B12 receptor sites. Now, if you doubt this fact, let's have a look at what the vegan doctors say about the B12 in spirulina. We know that vegans will tend to look away in regard to certain uncomfortable truths about vegan foods. So when we find them actually acknowledging certain dangers of a plant-based diet, which spirulina can often be found, we usually find that they've been kind of forced to do so because of the extreme damage that can otherwise be done to people's health.
What about various algae-type products like spirulina, which are advertised as natural vitamin B12 sources? Not only do they not actually contain B12 that's usable for humans, it's even worse than that. They may contain B12 analogs, look-alike molecules that can even block your absorption of real B12.
So in other words, if methylmalonic acid hadn't gone down, that increase in B12 didn't do my body any good. And most likely, I'm going to hypothesize that the batch of spirulina that I used after the second test probably contained a lot of vitamin B12 analogs. That would explain why B12 went up, but methylmalonic acid was still up instead of being low. Because if the B12 was active, methylmalonic acid would have gone down. This was about a year or so worth of spirulina. I was convinced spirulina didn't work. So don't count on spirulina for B12.
What are my concerns about spirulina? My main concern is that this organism produces a molecule that is similar to vitamin B12. It's a vitamin B12 analog. And the problem is that molecule can occupy the receptor site on your cells that are looking for real B12. But if that receptor site is already occupied by this pseudo B12 that doesn't really work, it doesn't really do what B12 is supposed to do as far as maturing your blood cells, etc., but it's occupying that receptor site, then it's can cause a functional vitamin B12 deficiency, and you don't want that. So for that reason alone, plus I'm never really sure about other contaminants that might be in these products, I'm not a big fan of spirulina. And there's been studies, if you do a search on spirulina and B12 analogs, you'll see the medical studies that verify this. So I'm not a big spirulina fan.
What I found was shocking. So what did I find? Well, the so-called vitamin B12 that spirulina is purported to have turned out to be a pseudo vitamin B12, not the real vitamin B12. So the vitamin B12 in spirulina is a vitamin B12 analog, not the real vitamin B12. So that was shocking to me because I wasn't expecting that. Now you might say, what does that mean? It is an analog, and that means it's a competitor. But more importantly, the pseudo vitamin B12 in spirulina has no effect on the human body. None at all. Okay? None at all. So you might be consuming it and it does nothing for you as far as vitamin B12 protection is concerned. Nothing. Now, what makes it worse is that it actually competes with the vitamin B12 from other food sources or even from your supplements. So let me just show you graphically what competition actually means. So if you imagine that these are vitamin B12 molecules, okay? The red ones are the pseudo vitamin B12, okay? So pseudo vitamin B12, these are the red ones, okay? And the green ones are the real vitamin B12, okay? So these are the real vitamin B12. Now, these are the receptor sites, on the cell surface. Now, what you see here is that the pseudo vitamin B12, they've taken up, there are 5 receptor sites. So the pseudo vitamin B12, they've taken up 4 of the 5 receptor sites and leaving one minuscule one for the real vitamin B12. So this is how competition in this instance becomes a bad thing.
So if you find yourself facing the advice of a muscle meat only diet mentor who is encouraging people to consume spirulina, you might want to find a new guru before you get brain damage and end up blaming meat in a B12 deficient stupor. As always, thanks for watching.